right, we have Health Alchemy, Craig Lane, second attempt at podcast here on the YouTube. What do I call this play? Explorations playlist, and I just love that word explore. And in the exploration, people fall into my life, and Deb Voisin here is kind of like one friend removed. I I saw what you were doing on Facebook, and I just couldn't believe what like, oh, these are edgy topics nobody wants to talk about. Ooh, I'm right on board with that.
Especially not on Facebook. Especially not on Facebook. Yeah.
Like not washing your hair as much as a accepted amount, right?
Day 40.
Is that day 40?
Day 40.
Oh my goodness.
But I built up to it. I built up very gradually, which is in general a health strategy too, right? Yeah.
So what sort of, you have your main scope of practice is movement, right? Is there anything else you'd like to add into that so I can represent you properly?
Well, I'm also, since my priority is on practical and playful things that are cheap and regenerative, that's just my point of view, and to bring things into everyday life, everyday practice. I have a similar point of view on some of these other unquestioned practices, right? Like I'm in my movement practice, I learned to question yoga and stretching, and they were sort of unquestioned in my life. And then when my son had some difficult, autoimmune and brain and allergy stuff, I learned that I had to question mainstream medicine as well. And in that case, I found a set of tools for how do you make better decisions yourself, and how do you become medically free. So I'm working on a book called Snake Oil Works, Stumbling into Health Freedom. So, yeah, so I do health through movement, and then this other viewpoint of health is a little more crossing over with some of your work, but more like kitchen, everyday practices.
What's free or easy or within reach of nature and does not require technology. Those are kind of
and measurable without expensive tests. And here's what I found in both realms, because we have these things that are unquestioned, or at least maybe in your family culture or the culture that you're in, there are certain things that aren't questioned. There's a moment where you have to question it, but then you can make as poor of a decision, hiring an expensive naturopath or doing a super expensive elite training and some kind of movement practice as well. And if you don't have some way to anchor that your progress, you're the frog in the water that's getting warmer and warmer, and then if you wait until pain or disease or disability, then you've missed a whole bunch of easy ways to change. So that's kind of my perspective on all sides. Like, I wrecked myself in the name of being spiritual more than anything else, or in the name even of science. And so how do you distill down in whatever the realm is, a practical toolkit so that you can tell, is this thing giving me longevity and sustainability and ease and more power, or is it sending me the opposite way because I just over trusted and I didn't have any other way to tell, to figure out what's exactly right for me.
Right. My favorite teacher that I always wanted a guru when I woke up at 25. So I sort of found Adyashanti 23 years ago. And one of my favorite things, he wouldn't say it regularly, but at one of the silent retreats in Mount Madonna here, he said, at its worst, spirituality is a disease. Because you're seeking something other than this moment, right? I'll be happy at that future moment when these conditions are met.
And the way I got the disease, it was during COVID. I don't know how I stumbled into this unconditional love cult, but the idea that unconditional love means that you really don't pay any attention to your own needs. Like, that was the most toxic thing. That was the most toxic belief I've ever had. And I didn't realize how many areas of my life I'd infected myself. These boundaries, like in nature, boundaries are natural. I mean, we have skin for a reason. The cells have a membrane. Boundaries, I think my fear was that they were rigid or cement or militaristic. And now I understand. And that was the big aha moment during COVID. The one thing I did learn is about how much, these organic systems work differently than linear hierarchical systems. And that was a breakthrough in another way, though. It was, more nature. Yeah, there's a reality when you got, somehow we've got to stay connected to reality, tangible, measurable things.
Which was the basis of my whole practice since I started doing yoga to heal the broken neck, because medicine saved my life. I should have died. But then in terms of long-term care at Dominican here, I kind of love bashing Dominican, but Dominican hospital, because I like to say it's where people go to die. A lot of my clients have ended up quite dead from simple procedures there. So their physical therapy there was a joke. It was an absolute joke. And I got this, I'm fresh out of my halo brace. And the first thing I did was I went and surfed when I was told I could never surf again.
Wow.
Because the doctor's the authority, right? And I just went, reject your projection. That's how you would feel if you were in my position and you're projecting that onto me. You'll never surf again. And I didn't know what I was doing, but I pushed it off and got angry. And then just to spite him, I went and surfed 2.5 weeks out of the halo brace. And my family was like, "You're going to die." And I'm like, I would rather die doing something I love than sitting in a wheelchair the rest of my life.
One of my earliest interactions with Western medicine when I, was a young adult, I was like 19, and I had been dancing. I was doing all these different moves. I'd just begun studying movement in contact improv, but I smashed my ankle on a trampoline because I was trying so hard. I was like, I'm going to train because I'm going to be an assistant dance teacher, blah, blah, blah. Although I was a very unskilled mover as a kid. But anyhow, I smashed my ankle. It was like swollen up, huge. And I go to the hospital for the first time as an adult. I go to a hospital and I expected thoughtful care. I expected kind of an anatomy tour of like, well, this ligament here and this, and the way you should move it to feel the best is here. So I realized I was expecting sort of prehab and physical therapy education right up front. And instead I'm sitting for 3 hours. The doctor won't come, finally comes, won't touch it, just says, stick it in a boot after the x-ray. And then I kept moving. I just kept doing everything I normally do instead of using the crutches. And then when I came back, they were like, we've never seen something heal that fast. And honestly, the funny thing is now what I do when someone has a tweak and they just text me and I'm like, well, make sure you have proper movement of the 26 bones of your feet and rotation in the 2 lower bones of the lower leg. And then I just give them 2 or 3, I'll just text them 2 or 3 quick things you can do to start to wake up our natural spring systems. And sometimes it unsticks the fascia or it just knocks something enough that there can be immediate relief. And other times we're talking about retensioning the whole system. But the main thing is this mindset change towards empowering yourself with the right information so you don't settle for limiting remedies that could actually could have ruined your life if you went along with their projection onto you, right?
Right.
It can be the same and it can be the same in quote, holistic practices. I thought, even a year ago, I thought I had the best toolkit in the world. I thought I'm moving better than ever. And then my hips both go out at the same time at a premier event, a premier movement event with these very skilled movers. And my hips both, because they're so fragile from having the ligaments been so torn from hyperextending, and exactly, I know exactly what I was doing. Now, 20, 30 years later, I know how I did it. But that's the thing. You don't know while you're doing it if you overstretch. You can't feel it. When you overstretch, you can't feel whether you did ligament damage. But if you stop training and you stop doing the handstands and the splits and all the athletic things, and you're not quite keeping the muscle tone quite as strict, and then the bones are counting on the muscles, not so much the tension of the ligaments, and then the communication. There are nerves in the ligaments that are telling your body where it is in space. And so then there's this disruption of you even knowing where you are in space. So it's the crazy thing is almost everybody I know in their 50s who's been an athlete is getting hip and knee replacements. And they're like, oh, it's because I was an athlete. No, it's because of the way we're doing anything. Even people who sit a lot. When I studied the Gokle method of primal posture, there are ways of sitting that the artisans and the monks used in the 1500s, 1600s that are very easy. They're based on an easy, relaxed thing. There's none of this like sitting up straight. They're actually sitting quite down straight. So why I said all this is there's a lot of confusion on how to achieve physical integrity, and one of those and one of those is when and what to stretch, when and how to sit, and I always end up going back to what could our ancestors do that we don't do, like or look in a village in West Africa when those women don't have the option for a C-section. What's their prenatal care like? I tell you one thing, they don't spin around dancing a lot. They're actually quite cautious about that. What did I do while I was pregnant? Oh, I want to show how much I can spin. It was like, it's like, the funny thing is there's so much, like you going back to that one thinker 100 years ago, there's so much that people already had to do wisely in other times and other cultures, that when we have these modern safety nets, like surgery or I'll just go get a massage, or I'll just get chiropractic, that people lose sight that we've usually been able to manage ourselves much better.
Right, which is what, after that broken neck, that's what I decided when I started waking up was, oh my God, I need to learn like Suzuki Roshi. Suzuki Roshi has a great quote. The guy who founded the Tassajara Zen Center here in the Monterey Carmel Mountains. One of my one-liners from his life was, what's the most important thing they would ask him? You're enlightened. And so he would say, oh, most important thing is to know the most important thing. So I use it as use of energy, use of my chi, what I want to use my energy on. And it was learning the stuff we're talking about for 30
what's
years.
Important. How do you know what's important? Exactly. Yeah. And you don't want to figure it out necessarily when it's totally blasted and gone, but we are and then the biggest discovery I've been making is just that blueprint in nature is abundance and regeneration, and even death is part of the regeneration. I think in our phone conversation you were talking about, even human waste is part of this web, this ever energetic web. And one of the main things I learned through studying with people like Ido Portal and Frey Faust and Esther Gokle, and just this kind of ancestral resilience way of thinking, this regenerative way of thinking, gravity is an endless resource. Gravity is a force that humans have always known how to recycle. They've always been able to go, I'm going to do this much, but receive. I'm going to do and receive. And versus where we get even actually the act of sitting with your back pressing against a chair, our bodies have to actually be doing. There's a lot of tension that gets in the way of us later receiving and recovering and rebounding and being a spring system that is kind of like a slinky, going down the stairs. It can just capture the energy and keep going. The problem is a lot of us start to copy imitations of these regenerative systems and then get it wrong. Like I thought, I'll fall forward when I walk. But architecturally it was crashing into my back because the springs need to be from the ground all the way through your skull. We're designed to have this whole body tension so that we aren't like getting pinched in one part and the impact isn't all going to one place. And one thing I'm glad I learned early on, I think that was with Jean Couch, who had studied with Noel Perez, who was Iyengar's first European yoga student. Anyhow, I learned way back then, that's what got me off of yoga. I had the phone number 1-800-LOVE-YOGA. I was a yoga teacher teaching 15 times a week. I was in Rodney's first ever teacher training program. He was in Rolling Stone magazine. I knew Donald Moyer, who was high up at Yoga Journal. I was like, this is it. Yoga's here. This is in 1990 something. I don't know. But I was like, it's going to be in every gym. This is it. I'm on the yoga wave. This is it. I'm going to do this. And then I learned that the best movers in the world don't stretch at all, except like a cat, like, you know, or they just move through a quick range of motion and then they're out. They don't do this like holding and you know, and I when I realized that villagers in West Africa, they sit differently, they bend differently, they walk differently, their baby carrying culture is different, their how they manage water, everything is different. So I learned that movement is cultural, and oh drats, I need to find another way. I've struggled for many years to find the way, but now that I understand how to, they have this spring system. Now I understand, how do you take someone who's a little stuck, and how do we unstick the parts to restore the whole system? So why did I say all that? I don't know. Oh, regeneration. Yeah, regeneration. It's a holistic way of thinking. With, you know, we're mostly made of fascia, you know, besides liquid, what, 70% liquid, we're mostly collagen, and the sticky fibers of fascia through and between and around everything. So we're more of these rubber, most of our system is these rubber bands around water balloons, right? And people think of the bones like they're these cement things with metal connecting the cement things, and instead of these spiraling, rebounding, regenerating systems. So that's kind of, and this is what the cutting edge is of professional sports and dance right now, or it's kind of been coming. But like, one of my mentors trains Olympic sprinters, another mentor trains professional dancers, because those are people that have to be able to get every ounce of efficiency out of their system. But there's a lot everyday people can do, and that's what I like to focus on, is how do you make a simple everyday shift that at least stops you from leaking energy, right? And then where's some simple place you can start to recollect the energy? But I think some parts of yoga are great and some parts are not. And some of the parts that are great are not even visible when we think. You know, we think of the positions like, oh, I'm doing triangle pose. But really what's great about it is that it's a practice, that it's getting up and down from the ground, that you're using your body weight, that you're paying attention to your breath. So there's no practice I would just say immediately throw out. But what I would do is instead open the perspective of what's going to bring me back to my blueprint of a being that's supposed to be able to effortlessly run. And I don't know about you, but I've never in my life effortlessly ran until I've been retraining in this toolkit that I've been training in for the last 5 years. Now I get these moments where I'm flying, and I never, even as a child, I was a nerd. I couldn't even walk a mile in PE class. I had to sit down. I was just so sedentary, and I would sit in lotus hours at a time, and I didn't know I was wrecking my hips and my knees. So this idea of the possibility of effortless movement that are on our that have priority, you know, we breathe 22,000 times a day. Have we prioritized the diaphragmatic mechanics, right? Or are you sitting in some way that traps your diaphragm all day, right? Or are you doing some kind of back bend trying to sit up straight and pretending to meditate when your diaphragm is trapped? So that's what I'm all about, is how do we get practical about all this, where you look, you know, in terms of priority. Okay, what do? We take many thousands of steps, we take thousands of breaths, we spend so many minutes or hours sitting, getting up and down from furniture, up and down from the ground, and then figuring out what is it, kind of like you used the word nourishment early on, right? Like, then where do I need to really nourish that I'm depleted? Is it joy? Is it community? Is it the biomechanics of, do I have like arches that are a little collapsed, or do I have arches that are too high? Because then we can start to tune, you know, get that little extra nourishment where it's gone.
So what, you know, I'll summarize is one of the things I think that's important to understand is we talk about preventative health, but I call it charting the early warning signals and correcting the trajectory that's going over here when you want to be up here. So the toolkit of movement, early warning signals, what are the early warning signals? You can spot them and then make the corrections quickly. But there's another deeper piece. And we'll go to that in a minute, but that's discernment. That's what we talk about discernment and grace. If you don't have discernment and you don't align with grace, then you're not even available for what's present, right? So the first question I wanted to ask you was actually, what led you to become who you are? And you've kind of already answered a lot of that. What led you to be, well, it sounds like, there's a couple of things there, but if there's anything else you want to add to that,
Well, okay. One other interesting piece is I've always been a researching nerd and kind of a reporter. And always, like as a kid, I would sit there with a blank piece of paper and scribble all over it before I could ever write, and get up like I'm going to report. Da, 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 get in front of a little window. I'm reporting. So for example, I've probably studied with between 600 and 700 different yoga, movement, martial arts teachers. I'm always collecting data points and then synthesizing the information up. And the way that I made a living, when I realized I could not make money as a yoga teacher back in 1990, whatever, then I was like, oh, there's the internet. I guess I'll try it. And I had some basic market research job, and I just figured out how to do it. I just figured out how to do things along the way. And my gift was always synthesizing a large system and communicating out, the users, when they opened up their phone, they couldn't figure out how long to press the button, or they couldn't figure out when they wanted to talk on their Fire TV, they couldn't figure out how close to hold the thing to their mouth. I'd be like, oh, what are people actually doing? Like, what's their real behavior, and what do they want? And then what happened that was with what was built? And so this dynamic between built and behavior. And, in college, I briefly studied architecture. So that interaction between our environment and our behavior, our culture and our choices, our furniture and our posture, our technology and our neck pain, like it's this in and out. And my role in the middle is to negotiate through doing lots of research and then simplifying down, what's a very basic next step. So that's also what makes me really curious about where is it that we get awakened to, do we really have to, like you said, those early warning signs? Well, if people knew the early warning signs, they would pay attention to them. But in a system where it pays more to actually get sick and go to a hospital and get, quote, free surgery, no one has trained our community what the early warning signs are. And that's another service that I like to do. I was like, if I look at the human blueprint for adaptability and flow, and the flow of liquids, the flow of energy, it's all the same thing. We see that health is movement. When your lymphatic system doesn't flow, your sewage system is stuck. When you're constipated, the waste isn't leaving. When your body is got sticky tissue, hydration, the water can't get there. The tissue dies. So once I understood that movement and health are so, some of the holistic and older health systems like Chinese medicine with the meridian system, and it's been known that these are the same thing, but with the Rockefellers and the pharmaceutical based cut, drug, and burn system that became profitable in between, then we started, instead of, and that's where I'm at. I was like, I learned, because of my son's incurable stuff, I learned to insource medicine instead of outsourcing it. Even though I was going to some of the best people, smartest, great providers of all kinds, at the end of the day, I still had to insource, because that was the only thing that was sustainable. And that's what happened at the end of the day. Like, even during COVID, I flew around the world. I was studying with some of the world's premier movement teachers, and still I dislocated both of my hips. I hadn't been able to really synthesize in what was an early warning sign, and what was the most important, thing for me to practice. And for me, anything that gets in the way of me getting better at walking is not worth doing. Nothing that gets us worse at walking is worth doing. When we look at the people over the age, I'm 56, people over the age of 65, what is it? They're the majority of them, like a fall is pretty much leading directly to death, right? Well, why do people fall? Well, walking is a one-legged activity. And if you're always like sitting with both butt cheeks on the ground, or you're standing with both feet on the ground, or you're not walking very much, you're not moving your spine very much, are you even practicing getting up and down from the ground in a culture where all the beds are at chair height, the chairs at chair height, the car is at car height? So people have lost this sense of agency and of what's important and what are the early warning signals. And I'm a main case because I'm so hypermobile. I was putting my knees behind my hips when I was a show-off yogi, and I broke my own I cracked my own rib doing too deep a back bend. Like I'm hypermobile. I cannot feel when I've gone past a limit. And so now I'm conscious. I'm like, well, now I'm going to focus, like you said, on nourishing. What's a nourishing movement that will matter when I'm 85? Oh, walking, getting up and down from the ground, taking a fall, So, and now I've got a great toolkit, because one last thing is variability. People practicing anything mechanical, 1, 2, even though there's value in this, there'd be more value in doing it differently, but play-based training installs new movement patterns, new neural networks exponentially faster when there are variables and you have to adapt to something. And so when we look at what's going to help us age well, it needs to, like, as a surfer, right? You're interacting with thousands of different variables, other people, other surfboards, the angle of the water, the shape of the waves, the rocks to avoid. Martial artists are avoiding, they're doing all this with other people. Rock climbers have all this puzzle. So, but that's one of the other things that is missing in people that are with a population that's really failing to age well. What's missing is having challenging activities on one leg where there's enough variation that you maintain all the, that really helps build simple things like that, help build towards walking better than doing something static, that's one of the other things is I made the huge mistake when I only did static positions as my main movement practice. It made me worse at moving. When I went to, and I started studying African dance after I finally quit yoga, I was terrible. I was worse than terrible. I was worse than some average person that came off the street, because I was teaching yoga 15 times a week. And here I go I couldn't bounce. I couldn't let go. And so that is one of the other things is I hear people, oh, I should stretch more. I should do more sit-ups. I should do more planks. I'm like, I'm not sure. I'm not so sure that's the right, that's going to get you the best result in the long run.
So the short answer, I've been doing facilitation for a long time. So the short answer, what led you to become who you are, then it was the same answer I would give, which is I learned all the things that don't work. And now that led me to become the person who's offering the things that do work. In spirituality, there's the neti, in India, not this, not that. It's the old, it was the absolutism. I forget what they called it in India, but it was, the non-dual sort of approach. And so you find out what you are by finding out what you're not. I am not my body. I'm not this. And it can go too far, where you actually which I was in for a year, a dissociative state, So we learn what's not working to learn what to try.
What does.
It'd be the opposite, right? And
then you talked about, we started to allude to then developing some sense of priority or blueprint, right? Like I can be not this, not that. And part of the reason I got stuck so long over there, like in these repetitive loops where I thought I knew what I was doing, is I didn't really have this sense that there is a blueprint for aging gracefully, moving gracefully. And it's been around since humans started walking on 2 legs. So that I'm hoping this time around, that's what keeps me vital longer. My aim now is I hope to distance run by the time I'm 60. Yeah.
So you had mentioned, let me get my little document up here. So you've mentioned how yoga and stretching can harm or help us. So then, you've mentioned how yoga can be done properly. That was sort of another, movement thing. So static stretching can harm us. So is there a form of static stretching though that you would say does work, or would you just say kind of?
Yes. Okay. Oh yeah, this has got a lot of nuance. I'll try to be brief. So the least useful is passive stretching, where there's just a flaccidity. There's not a lot of resistance, whether it's the muscle having some part of you having to push against something else. So the first level is if things that are more active. And I know there are a lot of skilled teachers that teach students how to, elongate and activate. There's a lot of that good stuff in some of these practices. The worry would be, what are we elongating or making active, and why, right? So I'm going to start with passive. If you hold some things passively for over 2 minutes, you do start to get a very deep detangling of some of the tissue and fascia. So I just learned that. I just found that research this week from some physiologists up in Canada that I was talking to. But the thing is, make sure that the thing you're elongating or detangling needs to be detangled. And for example, an overstretched hamstring will appear to be tight. Some people are misreading a tight hamstring. An overstretched hamstring can read like a tight hamstring. So maybe what and one thing is that we can do is when there's a load, when there's a heavy load, like whether it's your body weight or some kind of like kettlebell, or when you add load onto tissues, whether you're doing repetitive or held positions, that detangles the fascia too. So resistance training, you can have faster results with some resistance training, whether it's you're using your body weight in certain positions, or whether it's but what I've learned recently is to have intentionality around it. Like most humans that sit, there's just a map. Like most humans who are in a culture that sit have this map. The older you get, there's a slight twist. One shoulder is slightly higher, one side is slightly, the pelvis is slightly tilted. It's just what happens. We have a heart on one side, and we have 2 lobes of the lung on one side and 3 on the other. And this asymmetry as we age just gets, and then it's predictable. If you sit very much at all, there are certain places and certain fascial lines, certain tension lines, like there's a back line, there are diagonal lines, there are side lines. And if we just think about, are we tensioning those to their maximum, enough to retension the body? But if, say, like most of us, our front line is already floppy, doing more front line extension when I'm already overly stretched in the front may not be the plan. So that's why these so why did I say all this? So my suspicion is some brilliant yoga practices have all this covered. My suspicion is, but I myself, as a yoga teacher with some of the most skilled people, I blew my knee in Ashtanga yoga. And I couldn't tell I was headed for disaster. So the practicality of back bends in nature, they're just not something our ancestors would have done very much of. But it's also a question of how you do it. So one of the most important things, like Iyengar, if you study his Light on Yoga book, the photos of him, the integrity of his spine and his trunk, gorgeous integrity. So if he did bend his back, it was mostly done right above the sacrum, and it was this pretty straight rest of his back. You can look at the architecture of the spine and see he was working with, the back is meant most to bend down in the very bottom lumbar. The thoracic spine is meant to extend a bit, but what sloppy Westerners like me do is we just we break our back instead of bend our back. in our imitations of what we think is quote right. So and one other thing is, for example, if we train with a locked arm, like, you know, side planks or even just yoga position where training, no, locked arm, useless. Locked arms are useless. When you take a fall, I have this one really great friend. I was showing her some of my research about, you know, prioritizing functional movement, organic functional movement. And her arm was in a cast, and she was asking, like, oh, what about the pose where you put both arms locked behind you? And I was like, no, I would probably train something else. I'd train something more on an angle. I would train something that uses more of me in more organic collaboration, because, you know, these militaristic shapes just don't, they're not for movement. They're and they actually can get in your way. So if you're training your locked arms behind you and that's your main movement practice, you go to fall down, what are you going to do? You're going to fall on a locked arm, and then the damage is going to be much worse than if you'd been training things that can move, training on these, you know, or even, you know, so if I already had a yoga practice, I would just start to learn to just check for movement. You know, is this thing, do I have options from here? Like that was Feldenkrais's top priority, is like, how adaptable is it? How many options do you have? That's what freedom is. And when we go to end range, because we're chasing a stretch, and like me, look, I could hyperextend this shoulder, that I still don't feel a stretch, but I'm damaging the tissue here so that I'll feel the stretch less and less. So the question is a reorganizing of our priorities. And there's more and more smart yoga where people are putting functional movement in, or they're adding this spring-like or bow-like qualities. But where I'm finding the most, the greatest stuff is in the sports side, because they have measurable results. Like if something makes a sprinter faster, you can tell it's a measurable biomechanical improvement, versus someone who's dancing when it is purely aesthetic, or someone's purely exercising because it feels a certain way. You can't really, it's hard to tell by yourself what that's going to look like in 10 or 20 years. And the thing is, if you really study the shapes of the bones, we don't have a straight, there's nothing straight here. Nothing about us is at a 90-degree angle, but we're in a 90-degree angle world. And what do? We try to break ourselves to look like we can be 90 degrees. So if nothing else, just back off of any extremes. That's just the first thing to do, back off, and then learn about the anatomy enough. That's what I like to teach people. It's like, learn about how it's supposed to work, so that then you can pick what restores this ease we're meant to have.
Oh, I just love this, because I was in the when the Bikram phase was going around, and some of the Bikram studios here locally, I kept getting in trouble for on the one leg balancing posture, you had to lock your leg, and I always bent my knee a little bit and had a little movement in the knee and the hip versus the locked leg, because my body said, this is ridiculous to have all that bone going up into the acetabulum, right up into the hip joint. I want to have a little bit of space in the knee and a little space in the ankle and the hip, and I kept getting yelled at. Lock that.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. And this is this is exactly the issue, is are we doing it to conform? And now there might be some person who has such tight hamstrings or something that it's huge progress just to be able to even get the leg straight. I don't know. There's always an exception, right? But the main case should be being able to teach responsiveness. You know, we have 364 joints in our spine, but most of us, we're getting trapped in these shapes. The further we are in a squishy furniture, then it's moving as a block. Guess who, when they fall, is going to fall hard? The block, versus something that can distribute force. So when the spine is trained to respond, I can counterbalance the force, I can distribute the force, I can even then start to generate a rebound with my spine. So this, I get too conceptual, but the main idea is, if we work on the idea that we are this living system and there's nothing about us, the opposite of movement is death. When we pretend that we can stop things. And that's and I saw this interview the other day that one of my mentors showed on YouTube, and there were these sports commentators straight-faced showing Usain Bolt setting a new world record in sprinting. They were like, this guy's form is terrible. Look at how he's bending his spine. This guy, he's really got a lot of work to do. I just so what I'm saying is, but then the mistake I made is I became a sloppy hippie. I'm not a fan of sloppy hippie anything. I'd rather be clear and practical, and that's where some of the elegance of dance, where dancers have learned to extend and rotate their spines, but then they do it for attention, and then it becomes a competitive thing. Oh my God, you'll love this. I have another, there's an author I love who wrote this book called Exuberant Animal. His name is Frank Ferencich. He has all this evolutionary biology-based, play-based fitness stuff. And he's just so well researched. And I talked to him a few times about the book. I had one of the projects I'd worked on. And one of his statements in his book, Play as Though Your Life Depends Upon It, he claimed that professional sports and dance caused the most destruction to human health of any other thing in human history. And that's because when we become a village of spectators who don't want to harm themselves to compete, to fight for the attention of the adoring masses, then we have two broken groups of people. We have the broken superstars who destroy themselves for attention and fame, who, the contortionists retire at 23, the gymnasts are retiring, their peak is 20 something. Professional dancers tend to retire by the time they're 30, and yoga teachers are getting hip replacements, and it's, you just don't hear about it because everybody just assumes, oh, they're moving is healthy. And so it's a matter of repetitive stress, and it's a matter of attitude of like, do we separate ourselves from moving gracefully because we're not good enough, and I'm not good enough to get on the stage, so I'm not going to dance. Oh no, if you go to a village in West Africa, everybody dances, and but it's a simpler, there's an economy to it, so you could do it a long time. So that's why I said as part of this is that mindset of, like you talked about maybe before our call, is like where the ego comes into yoga and you wreck yourself, but where you can even use your breath to destroy yourself. I can use ujjayi breathing, like from Ashtanga, to like bully my way through something, versus I like to much more tide. Everything seems to be a wave in what I care about. Versus the sense of like a tide that is coming and going, where it's, and yet most of us in modern culture, sedentary culture, we have an inhalation-based bias skeleton. Most of modern Western culture has a slightly trapped inhalation. That's kind of what the hump or the shape of the ribs is. And then we're breathing more with our back, or we're breathing more with our neck, versus the exhalation actually lets the core rest back in and let the breath expand up and out. So the thing is that ease is, and the permission that it's okay to care about how you move. It's okay to want to learn how to dance. It's okay to dance badly. It's okay to run badly. And there are gentle tools to make everything feel better.
A couple of things. First one is, it's something that we could talk about maybe in a second interview, but are you familiar with orgonite? Wilhelm Reich,
Yes.
orgone energy. So what I discovered is through my own investigation is that our bones are orgonite. And so orgonite's based on the piezoelectric effect, where you have a crystal with two wires going to a light bulb, and every time you hit the crystal, the light bulb lights up. And that's the piezoelectric effect. And so when you put weight on the bones, it activates the piezoelectric effect in the bones. So that's one thing. And I know I'm going to blow your mind on that one. Like, we go into another universe. But then the second thing is, because I want to get this question in. There's two questions left before the end here. Um, so the last question, I'll cut you off if I need to, is so my main spiritual teacher, Adyashanti, talked about failing at meditation. He says, I learned that I learned through failure. And it was something that you had said, so can you explain just for maybe a minute or two about, what does that mean, learning through failure,
Oh, this is such a great question. And in part because our culture we don't have that many places where it's safe to fail, and we do small failure. In fact, at Santa Cruz Movement, that was one of my favorite things about their practice, was you do a lot of partner stuff where you're training your partner just to a little failure. So you get used to failure is the path to success. And what I'm hoping to avoid are these catastrophic failures. I mean, both of my hips going out just after I wrote a book about what exercise to avoid so that your hips won't go out was humiliating. I didn't know that the root thing was the way I had been walking since I was a duck-footed child. So the opportunity, behind every failure, if you just keep going, as long as you know where you're going, and you have some way to course correct and have some sense. And my problem was these weird numbnesses I created, this numbness that I created without any connection to the internal and external. So that's probably the best short answer.
Oh my God, wonderful. So I have, I'll put the description in the description, your website link, but how can you be reached? Is it through your website? Is there any other way to reach you other than your website? Or is you want to
the website has great ways to meet me. My website is movingasdesigned.com, and I'm tinkering around. I'm quite an experimenter to try to figure out, because we're in between paradigms. Like, 20, 30 years ago, I was like, yoga, it's going to be in every single gym. I know it. And now we're on the front edge of this, regenerative movement that right now the Olympic sprinters are practicing, and the high level dancers, and it's kind of proliferating over to fitness culture slowly. And so I'm still experimenting with what is the right format. And at the end of the day, one thing you and I had talked about is people having their own movement practice is cheaper than going to a group, and it saves gas from going to a gym, although you miss the community stuff. Right. I like community stuff for play, joy-based stuff. That's one reason I still love African drum and dance. I sometimes teach a beginning version of that. But I also assemble sometimes small groups so that we can do play-based movement installation and biomechanics. And I also like to help people remotely build their own movement practice so they can even fire me.
Oh, wonderful. But we have a hard stop here. I think, is there anything else you wanted to add in before we exit at least today's part?
It's just that the body is such a beautiful thing. It's adaptability. Okay, this is the last thing. Physical therapists are curing cortical blindness in kids who have never seen, a 90% cure rate, because there's fascia connecting every part of our system. My teeth had never closed my entire life, and without any kind of restorative dentistry, they closed when I did some weird face yoga and tongue exercises. And I was a duck. These people with cerebral palsy, where their bodies are like really tense, functional patterns trainers are getting them to hear. So the people know what pieces now you have to put together. You can use focused breath to re-architect. You can use fascial retensioning, and then you can use the rotations, relearning the rotations and the movement of the bones so that your feet regain their sovereignty, then your hips can move. So it's known. People are doing amazing things. It's just not yet known to me what's the most practical way for everyone to have access to this. Okay, I'm working on it.
I got something to end on. So my favorite yoga teacher I told you about, it was 10 years into my practice, and this guy came along. You got to start over again 10 years in. So guess what? His first posture for Americans was Shavasana. He said, that's the most important posture for Americans. And then he said his second most important posture was standing mountain pose, because you got to articulate from the feet up. And I was like, right? I was
absolutely agree. How you stand is how you sit, and well, how you sit has become how you stand. How you stand is how you walk and how you run. Absolutely. And it's known. Unfortunately, there's some bad info about posture out there, though. But it's known when we look at our ancestors and villagers. It's not standing up straight, and it's not the weight in the front of the feet. There's a place where all the bones of the foot can move. So anyhow, yeah, that person was dead right.
We'll have to do it on part 2.
We will have to do a part 2.
Thank you so much. I mean, there's about 5 more questions I wanted to ask, but we'll go to that later. And I'll turn the recording. Thank you. We'll have the recording off now.